Domestic violence is a serious issue for anyone in any city. District Court Judge Robert Stiehl met with us to provide important information about domestic violence and what to do if you think you've been a victim.
Under North Carolina law, what qualifies, number one, it's got to involve a special relationship between the perpetrator or a batterer and a victim. And what that means is it involves people who are married or former spouses, or that they'd had a romantic relationship, or it could be a parent and a child, a grandparent and a grandchild, or it could be folks who have lived together as roommates in the same household. So, secondly, you have to have the element of violence that is involved, either from batterer to victim, or a child of the victim, or a household member. It requires the attempt to physically injure, to provide bodily injury, placing a victim or a family member or other in fear of imminent serious bodily injury. Or lastly, it could be a form of continued harassment that leads to the infliction of substantial emotional distress. And not all times in the domestic violence realm are we dealing with overt acts of violence between a perpetrator, a batterer, and a victim. There are times where there is a systematic use of manipulative controls that would amount and do amount to mental abuse. If you have, and I'll stereotype, a husband or boyfriend that is telling the girlfriend or wife you cannot have a job, or when she comes home from working, takes her pay, controls money, puts her on an allowance. If she's to stay at home and not have contact with the outside world as a form of control. And so there is a whole host of other manipulative tools that are used as part of this larger picture of domestic violence. If there is dysfunction and disruption in the relationship of the parents, then 9 out of 10 times these children are awakening in the middle of the night. They're hearing raised voices. They know it's their parents. They're exposed to, at best, loud arguments between the two most significant people in this world that are charged with taking care of them. And imagine the confusion that brings to the child or children on the other side of the wall as they listen to these things unfold. There are times where battering is a learned behavior. It is a fact boys who grew up where their mothers were battered are twice as likely to assault their significant other in some non-fatal manner as a means of control or as a means of coping with stress. So, myth number one is if kids don't see it, they don't know about it. Another myth is that, well, everyone runs down to the courthouse when domestic violence occurs. The fact of the matter is that only about 1 in 4 assaults between significant others, they're reported. Another aspect of domestic violence is sexual assault. It is rape in this state for a husband to have non-consensual intercourse with a wife. Now, that law changed decades ago in North Carolina. And so sexual assault is another area of the law where there historically is underreporting, meaning there are far more incidents of rapes, and actually 1 in 5 rapes are reported. Stalkings and other, 1 in 2 stalkings are reported to be dealt with. This is an area of the law where people typically don't come to the courthouse and report a physical assault or a sexual assault within their own home. In our country, we've got 1.5 million incidents of domestic violence a year. On average, 1.3 million of those instances involve women as victims. And so the best advice I think that could be given is the first time it happens, you need to act upon it. Because if you allow it to come and go without any action whatsoever, the message you have laid to the perpetrator, to the batterer, is that it's okay to use violence, force, mental abuse as means of control and intimidation. If the violence has begun. 911 is the first line of help. We are blessed to have the Care Center for Families Involved in Domestic Violence here in Cumberland County. They can direct folks, provide guidance on what appropriate programs exist here in Cumberland County to assist those. And what you may find is that the Care Domestic Violence Center will recommend that a victim receive some measure of services from the Women's Center in downtown Fayetteville. You know, they've got a unique program where fourth Tuesday of the month from 6 to 8 p.m. they have a family law clinic. If you can't afford a lawyer, you can go down there and talk with a lawyer that's volunteering their time about domestic issues, to include domestic violence. How do you separate? What to do about child custody? What to do about support for children? How do you deal with if you are able to leave with your children? How do you get by? You may also find that the financial aid counseling program at the Care Center would be an appropriate resource to help you come to understand how do you become economically self-sufficient to stand on your feet. Fayetteville Tech has a wonderful program. It's a career makeover program. For 1 week, they'll plug you in. They'll give you classes on resume presentation, how to dress. Care Domestic Violence Center has a 24/7 hotline. There's a national hotline as well, 1-800-799-SAFE. If you have computer access, you can check on the website for the North Carolina Coalition Against Domestic Violence. They list every county in North Carolina that has a domestic violence shelter. So if you are put out or must leave and you don't have the resources to stay somewhere, that you can look up and obtain that information that will allow you to weather the first several days or weeks. Here in Cumberland County, we're blessed with the Interfaith Hospitality Network that was established in the 1990s. They take in on average 65 families a year, about 195 citizens total. 2/3 of them are children, so that tells you kids that are displaced with a parent or parents. But so many times, the dysfunction that exists in families that are undergoing and living in and wrestling with domestic violence, there are issues of substance abuse. And so there are counseling programs that can help. Our mental health services here in Cumberland County are amply capable of assisting and providing classes. And, you know, one national statistic is there are 18.5 million mental health visits a year in the United States that are directly linked to physical assaults and domestic violence in our country. 18.5 million visits a year. And, you know, the other thing is, if you're injured, accept, seek, receive medical treatment. And be honest, don't cover, be truthful. In our country, the statistics from our healthcare providers attribute about $37 billion a year in expenses for treating non-fatal injuries as a result of domestic violence. That's a pretty staggering figure. We have a domestic violence restraining order that now exists under North Carolina law. It's a protective order that puts in place things such as the perpetrator is evicted from the shared residence that you're in, not to come back for a set period of time. These protective orders can last up to a year. Judge Beth Keever, Judge Kim Tucker, and our clerk Linda Priest were very forethinking in initiating the SafeLink program, where people were donating their cell phones that they weren't using any longer, didn't have service, but as you know, you turn your phone on, you still can get a 911 connection. And they would give these phones out with chargers, and if you didn't have a cell phone, you were provided one as a service of the courthouse in helping you get some measure of protection. Very complex issue, but thank goodness government is realizing how complex it is and undertaking efforts through mental health, through various counseling programs, through domestic violence shelters, through economic training and advice, and by virtue of, in North Carolina, any victim of domestic violence can walk into any courthouse in any county, whether the domestic violence took place in that county or not, and pursue a domestic violence restraining order. So there's a measure of convenience that, as it should be, in getting help and receiving help through the system and through other important measures.